And now, this.
Okay, let's go. Harry Tracy.
Harry Tracy! Trigger warning. The following contains the authentic accounts of factual historical figures and events. If historical information may upset you, then please withdraw now. Retreat.
Well, I guess you know who I am.
Harry Tracy is a true story. This telling is authored from sources spanning over 120 years. All characterized quotations are verbatim from interviews, newspaper articles, and testimonials taken at the time. Scott Martinez. Part 7. Seattle. Seattle is an anglicized pronunciation of a native chief's name. Captain George Vancouver was the first to map the Puget Sound and named it after his second lieutenant, Peter Puget. The name Puget Sound not only refers to the body of water, a deep and sheltered inlet connecting to the Pacific Ocean, but also refers to the region built around it, the cities including Olympia, Tacoma, and Seattle.
Convict Harry Tracy lands near Seattle. Appropriates a gasoline launch at South Bay near Olympia.
Harry Tracy entered the Oyster Company's main house, a shanty on the bank of the Puget Sound. It was also the home of Horatio Ailing, who, along with the camp cook, William Adair, was starting the workday.
Can a man cruise around the Puget Sound in that boat?
Frank Scott, arriving to work, walked into the shanty.
Sure, it's a great boat.
Would it take a fellow to Seattle?
Easy as pie.
How long a trip would it be?
Well, it's about 65 miles. Depending on the tides, weather conditions, it's a 6 to 8 hour cruise.
Then that's where we're going, as soon as I've had breakfast. You got any objection to that?
Harry Tracy. With characteristic daring, he took possession of a gasoline launch belonging to a Seattle man at South Bay near Olympia, forced 4 men who had the craft in charge to navigate it to Meadow Point, some 2 miles north of Ballard, where Tracy disembarked and his shang-eyed crew came to Seattle to tell the story of their thrilling experience with the convict.
The N&S, a large gasoline launch, was tied just outside. Tracy spotted Captain A.J. Clark, owner of the large gasoline launch, the N&S, and his 15-year-old son, Edwin Clark, and forced them into servitude aboard their own ship.
When I entered the house at the oyster plant, I noticed a man with a gun immediately. Take your hands out of your pockets, Captain. If you have a gun in there, it'll do no use to pull it. I was taken by surprise. Are you ready to shoot? If you are, I'm ready for you. I thought it was a joke that had gone too far. Who are you? I demanded. I am Tracy.
As the launch containing Harry Tracy and his hostage crew passed McNeil Island Federal Penitentiary, the outlaw asked Captain Clark to pull in as close as possible so that he could kill any guard he saw.
I'm gonna take a crack at one of those guards.
Frank Scott dissuaded Harry of this idea, as it might draw attention. The 4-man crew of kidnapped victims all later agreed that Tracy talked to Frank Scott the most, and was the one that Harry appeared to almost befriend. While I was mortally afraid of the man, still he made a fella feel at home. Frank Scott was also the one that asked Harry where David Merrill was.
I shot him in the woods.
Tracy then declared that he and David Merrill had mutually decided on a traditional, back-to-back, take 10 paces, turn and shoot duel.
But he was going to shoot me.
Tracy then professed that he cheated Merrill in the duel, turning early at 8 paces, not 10.
Yeah, what we agreed, was stand back to back, holding our rifles, take 10 paces each, then turn and fire, but I didn't trust him. So when I'd taken 8 steps, I fired a shot over my shoulder, hit him, and knocked him down. Then I walked over to where he was laying on the ground, fired another bullet into him.
The face is unrecognizable.
He was no good, like I said.
Harry Tracy's accounts of the duel, his line of reasoning to kill, and personal opinion of David Merrill varied and conflicted. He told the Fisher family while holding them captive,
I was afraid to trust him anymore. I miss him like hell, though.
while later Tracy told another hostage, Mrs. R.H. Van Horn,
I never had any love for him anyway.
July 14th, 1902, 13 days after the reported duel, Mary Wagoner was picking blackberries with her 12-year-old boy, George Wagoner.
The first thing we found was a black hat.
A foul odor led the boy to the man's body, decomposing in the July heat, with 3 bullets in it, 2 in the back, 1 in the head. Mary Wagoner instantly believed the body to be David Merrill, having read of Tracy's boasts of killing his partner in the papers, and reported the find to the sheriff.
Dead body of Outlaw Merrill is found, wedged between 2 logs. Discovery made by a woman and her son while out picking berries. Evidence that Tracy's story of assassination was true in details.
Did David Merrill make a deal with the law? If he did, apparently it was a poor one, as he was ultimately given 13 years in the Oregon State Prison. Did Harry Tracy kill David Merrill? Outlaw partners in violent crime, co-defendants at a public and prominent trial, 3 years confined together as convicts, as cellmates, co-workers at daily labor. And Harry Tracy killed David Merrill for something he read in the newspapers. That is the official story. It is not necessarily the truth. There was speculation and suspicion at the time. The Vanished Outlaw and 100 Years of Browns Park and Diamond Mountain both document strong evidence that David Land, after being Harry Tracy's first partner in crime, went on to live a long and quiet life under the name David Stillwell. These assertions, if true, set precedent for David Merrill to do likewise. David Merrill's brother Ben Merrill publicly proclaimed at an inquest held on July 16th,
I met with David and Harry while they were on the run.
Later it was Ben who officially identified the body of his brother, declaring the corpse was wearing the same clothes as last time he'd seen David.
Brother of Outlaw identifies the remains.
Ben swore vengeance.
I'll hunt down Tracy myself.
Ben Merrill never made any such attempt, as there is no record of him taking any part in the hunt for Harry Tracy. Ben Merrill did later marry Mary Wagoner. Just over 3 years later, on August 31st, 1905, in Wenlock, Mary Wagoner became Mary Merrill, the same woman who had found Ben's brother, David Merrill's body in the woods, with her son George, while picking blackberries. The prison doctor declared the corpse delivered to the Oregon State Penitentiary to be David Merrill, based on Merrill's medical file. However, Joseph Bunko Kelly, in 13 years in the Oregon State Penitentiary, declared that he and other inmates, on viewing the body, did not believe that it was David Merrill.
I do not believe it was Merrill's body that was brought back to the penitentiary.
Bunko wrote that time in the Oregon boot had visibly scarred David Merrill's ankle.
A big scar on his ankle from the burn, and the band of the boot wore a dent into the skin. There was a hole in the ankle half an inch deep. The body they brought back had gray hair, and Merrill had none. Merrill is alive today. Merrill is dead. Tracy killed his pal, just as he said. Body found at Napavine. Discovery made by a woman and her son while out picking blackberries.
Well, the engines broke down twice, but Tracy helped us fix them with a gun in one hand.
Harry declared he would not disembark the boat before dark. Dropping anchor at Meadow Point, Puget Sound, slightly north of Ballard.
He entertained us with dime novel stories of his deeds, and by Josh and my son about his red hair. Could you guide me inland on a trail that would take me to Lake Washington?
Frank Scott did guide Tracy into Seattle.
I have to get a 6-shooter. I need one badly. I must have it. I'll hold up a policeman and get his gun.
not before having Scott bind the captain and the crewmen.
My son had a sore wrist, and Tracy noticed it. The boy, on account of the sore wrist, was bound at the elbow.
I'll send you a lot of money to make up for kidnapping you in the launch, for I'll have plenty of dough pretty soon. You acted pretty decent by me. Well, so long. Harry Tracy, the Oregon convict who has successfully eluded numerous posses since his escape from prison, is either in Seattle or the immediate vicinity. Not satisfied with outwitting or scaring half to death a half-dozen sheriff's posses and nearly a regiment of state soldiery, Harry Tracy, the Oregon desperado, has turned his attention to Seattle. Tracy is looking for big game. He thirsts for a policeman, and a little gun party with a half-dozen deputy sheriffs would be sport much to his liking. And this is no joke either.
Seattle's founders, the Denny Party, did not arrive until 1851 and were the first pioneers to settle on the shores of Puget Sound. Then, on June 6, 1889, Seattle burnt to the ground.
A sea of fire! 32 blocks of smoking debris. The loss will exceed 10 millions.
Rebuilding Seattle utilized structures of brick and stone, modernizing the city. On July 17, 1897, the steamship Portland arrived in Seattle from Dawson, Alaska.
Latest news from the Klondike. Gold! 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 Gold!
The Klondike Gold Rush transformed Seattle, selling supplies to prospectors heading north to Alaska. In 1896, Seattle merchants sold $325,000 in goods. Between 1897 and March 1898, during the gold rush, the same sold $25 million. The 1900 U.S. Census set Seattle's population at 80,671. Seattle had 311 practicing lawyers, 178 physicians, 126 nurses, 55 dentists, and 11 veterinarians, 232 neighborhood groceries, 217 saloons, 74 meat markets, 43 bakeries, and 64 dairies. In July of 1902, the battleship Nebraska keel-laying ceremony at the Moran Brothers shipyard was an event that brought together the governors of 3 states and all the newspapers. The event marked an entrance into military production and nationally raised Seattle's profile as a major American city. The significant and ceremonial events of that weekend were converse to the major news stories of the day that Harry Tracy, escaped convict and desperate relic of the Wild West, was holding hostages and killing officers all across the city.
Tracy's trail of blood. Oregon convict kills 2 officers near Seattle. Desperado engages in 2 hot battles and continues his wild flight.
This reflected poorly on Seattle's current sheriff, Edward Cudahy.
They can't catch me in Seattle. I'm among friends.
Last seen, Harry Tracy had declared he was going to amble into Seattle, hold up a policeman, and maybe rob Clancy's saloon. This as he released his hostage, Frank Scott.
He walked into Seattle with his rifle in one hand and his pack over his shoulder.
But in actuality, Tracy had done the opposite. Doubling back and heading north towards Bothell, Louis Seffrit, a newspaper reporter, armed and embedded with the posse looking for Tracy in the Bothell area, noticed fresh tracks on a path that led down to a cabin. I pointed to a stump that stood about 25 feet in direct line in front of me. Instantly, Tracy arose from behind the stump I had pointed to, and as quick as lightning, his rifle was thrown to his shoulder. With Louis Seffrit was Deputy Sheriffs Jack Williams and L.J. Nelson, Snohomish County Deputy Sheriff Charles Raymond, and a fellow newspaperman, Carl Anderson.
The fight occurred at 3:15 in the afternoon and was over in an incredibly short time.
Carl Anderson was the first Seattleite to receive a bullet from Tracy's Winchester, grazing the cheek of the newsman.
The rain was falling so heavily that we were somewhat hampered in keeping a lookout.
Tracy fired 2 more shots, taking the life of Deputy Raymond.
When I saw Raymond fall, I fired 1 shot at Tracy from a Colt revolver. I was standing in the open directly in front of the convict. Tracy immediately shifted position of his rifle and let a bullet fly towards me. I heard it whizzing over my head.
With 1 bullet whizzing over his head, Louis Seffert was the target of a second shot.
Tracy fired at me a second time, the bullet striking the ground at my left side.
Seffert decided to play dead, rolling in proximity to the now deceased Detective Raymond.
His eyes were open and the stare on his face was frightful. Blood was rushing from his nose and his mouth. Death was so quick that he had not suffered.
Officer Charles Raymond left behind a widow and 5 children. Harry Tracy fired 3 more times, hitting Detective Williams, who thought he'd found cover.
Williams crawled out of the bush. He was shot 3 times under the heart, and even as he appeared in view, lurched to one side and stretched out, unconscious.
A separate account of the action says that one of Harry Tracy's bullets had shattered the barrel of Williams' gun, sending shrapnel deep into his chest and left wrist, accounting for the multiple wounds.
As Williams collapsed, Tracy disappeared. No sign of Tracy! Outlaw eludes Seattle officers. The whole adventure had hardly taken more than 2 or 3 minutes.
Williams never fully recovered and died a few years later as a result of complications from the wounds.
Tracy's trail of blood.
Directly after the gun battle, Harry Tracy was busy.
Drives away with stolen horse and buggy.
Kidnapping a farmer named Louis Johnson and his buggy.
I'm a deputy sheriff and one of the men on Tracy's tail. I must get to Seattle at once and I need your wagon. There is no time for delays.
So if you watch that whole video, you're pretty cool.
The preceding was one part of a 9-part project. To watch the next part, click here. Or to view the entire Harry Tracy documentary, click here. Well, that's just damn good news. Well, my mama got trouble.